All right, so how I textured this barrel, or how I'm going to texture this barrel. The first thing to note is I have my viewport set up. So I've got my 3D view on the top. I have my node editor on the bottom, and then here on the side, I have my UV image editor. To just as a refresher for kind of organizing your workspace, see in the bottom left and the top right corner of each window, you've got these three lines. So when you hover over these three lines, your cursor will turn into a plus symbol. If you click and drag into the existing window, you will split your view. If you click and drag into another window, it will merge it back together. Now you can only merge windows into similar size, so I could merge this top one into the bottom one because they're the same width. I couldn't merge this top one into the side one because they are different heights, and if I try, nothing will happen. So I'm going to slightly reorganize this. I'm going to split this way, and I'm going to set my node editor to the top. And then on the side here, I'm going to split. Actually, before I split, I'm going to get rid of my timeline because I don't need it. And then I will split and turn this left one into my image editor. Here. And then currently the render result is loaded in my UV image editor, so I'm just going to click this X to get rid of that. Okay. Now I'm ready to start the texturing process. And to do that, I'm going to select my barrel. I'm going to hit number pad / to go into local view, so I'm only worried about the barrel right now. And it appears as though I have already applied my subsurface, or I've already applied my array modifier on this one. And I don't think, yeah, I don't have a backup of this, so shame on me for not saving a backup with the array modifier. But I've got my barrel, a tab to go into edit mode. This has actually already been UV unwrapped. So what I'm going to do is select everything, and it kind of pains me to do this because it isn't a quick process, but I will select everything, hit Control E to open up my Edges menu, and clear all of my seams. So now if I select everything and hit U and unwrap, this is what it looks like. And actually, I feel like it should be a little bit different than that. But it's not. So there's my UV. So what I need to do is I need to set my seams so that I can kind of unfold the mesh and lay it on top of a texture. So let me first, I'm just going to select one board, and I'm curious. So I'm going to select just this board, and if I hit Alt, let's see, what is it? Shift H, it'll hide everything else. And now what I can do is take a closer look at my board. Now I have a subsurf modifier applied to this board, and so because of that, I've got some extra edge loops in here to help keep the edges somewhat sharp. So this might be a little bit more, a slightly more complicated mesh than some of yours. But the principles are the same. So with a board, before you start UV unwrapping, it's a good idea to just think about your mesh and think about the texture, and if there are natural places that you can insert seams. So places where there's a change in material would be a good place for a seam. Just as an example, we've got this mug here, which we'll get to later. As I unwrap this, right at this border between the plastic and the metal is a great spot to put a seam, because you're not going to notice that edge because you already have two separate materials. So changes in material, places that aren't going to be seen by the camera, so the back side of things, the underside of things, are often where you put it. If it's going to be covered by a particle system, fur or hair, leaves, grass, something like that, that can be easier and a good place to hide seams as well. And also literal seams in clothing. If you're doing clothing, it's just makes sense to put the seams where they actually are. So what I'm going to do with this is, with boards, usually every face of a board, every side of a board is fairly distinct, so you can just put the seams right at the edges and be all right. So the way I'm going to unwrap this is I'm going to select this edge and this edge. I'll Control E and mark the seam, and then I will select this top here, and I'm going to deselect these edges there that I don't need. Another way that you can select edges quickly, if you select one edge and then hold down Control and select the next edge. Whoops, that didn't quite work. Hold on. Select one edge, hold down Control, and select your next edge, and it will select all the edges in between. So you can quickly select large rows of edges that way. Mark that seam, and I realized this is not the seam that I wanted, so I'm going to clear that seam and select the one next to it. And again, it's Option right click to select an entire edge loop. Control E and mark the seam. Okay, so I got the tops done. I'm going to go to the bottom and select these right here, these three, and these three, and mark that seam. Okay, I'll select everything, U, and unwrap, and this is what I get. So I've got my two kind of main faces of the board. These are the sides, and then we have the top and the bottom. If I'm not sure which is which, in the 3D view, if I go into face select mode and I just start selecting faces, I can see those faces showing up in my UV editor. So I know now that that's the front face, which means over here next to it is going to be the side face. So I've got everything selected here. And what I would do, if I hit Alt-H to unhide everything, is then go around to each one of these planks and do the same thing. Now, if you haven't applied your mirror modifier, or not, I'm sorry, your array modifier, you only have to unwrap one board, and then the array modifier will also array the seams. So you only have to do it once, not 18 or 36 times, depending on what your barrel looks like. So you do that and unwrap it. And that's what I'm going to do real quick, so I'm going to pause the recording and then come back when I got everything unwrapped. Alright, so I deleted everything else, re-added the array modifier. So now if I, again, apply this again, tab to go into edit mode, and now I've got my seams propagated across all of the boards. And then I can do the same thing with my top boards. I'm just going to select all of the border edges. So I'm going to zoom in real close here. I'll select this edge all the way around. And the same one underneath it. And I'm just holding down Option and Shift and right-clicking to select the edge loops. And then I need to select the vertical edges at the corners as well. So I'll select those. And I'm just, I think I'm just going to do the, no, I'll do all the corners. That one, and this gets kind of tricky to select just the one that you want. That one. I think I still need to do this corner. And I'll select that one, and that one. Control E, mark seam. Okay, so I'll do the rest of these real quick, and then come back. Alright, so I unwrapped a couple of the planks on the top. I'm going to rejoin these two pieces together. So I can select them both, Control J, so now they're back to one solid piece, and then I'll select everything, and U, and unwrap. Now if I zoom in here, I can see all of my pieces. Now you'll still see some of these distorted pieces because there are still some that aren't unwrapped. I'm not going to worry about those for now. But I've got my unwrapped pieces. Next thing that I want to do is I want to load up my image texture. So I'm going to go Image, Open Image, and then I'm going to navigate to my texture. And if I go up here and click on this thumbnail icon, I can choose exactly what texture I want to use and open the image. Okay. So you can see that these are already kind of laid out from the last time that I unwrapped these, but I'll go over it again so you can understand what I'm doing. So I've got them unwrapped. Now I need to set up my shader, my material. First I make sure that I'm in Cycles Render, and I'm going to add a new material, and surface can be diffuse for now. I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to hit Shift A, add texture, image texture. And then connect the color to the color. Now by default, the image texture will be mapped to the UVs, so you don't have to worry about telling it to use your UV coordinates for the texture. So you just have to worry about adding the texture and connecting the color to the color. Now choose your texture, which is, oops, I don't need that. I can cancel that. Because I already opened my image texture in my UV image editor, I can just click on this little thumbnail to the left of Open and choose my image. You can see my preview here as updated, and if I change my 3D viewport shading to rendered, I've got the boards. Now again, some of this is left over from my last unwrap. So what I'm going to do is to kind of illustrate how this works is I'm going to select all of my UVs, and I'm going to move them. Oh, that's right, it tiles automatically. We'll move them off the edge for now. And let's see, I believe I can tell it to stop tiling. I don't seem to be able to turn off the tiling, unless it's somewhere else that I'm not familiar with. No. Guess not. But so now that you have your UVs unwrapped, now you need to position them on the texture so you get the texture that you want where you want it. So I'm gonna, on my barrel here, I'm just gonna select just one plank so I know where my textures are. I'm gonna go into shaded view. Now if you watch this plank in the 3D view, as I move these textures around, and if you hover over some UVs and hit L, it will select everything that's attached to it. So I hover over it, select L, G to move, just like in 3D view, and I'm going to position it where I want it on my texture. And if you notice, on the barrel itself, you'll see it change. So right now it's if I go over here, it's a really dark board. If I come up here, it's a very light board. So that's how I can affect where the image is mapped onto the board. So I will come over here and choose that. And I can go up here and select the next one and move that wherever I need it, which is the inside face, so you're not really going to see that update. And I'll just continue that process until I have everything laid out the way that I want. And when I do that, it looks like this. So as we look closer at these UVs, you see a lot of them are laying on top of each other. And that's okay. It just means that they're using the same texture space. And as long as it's not two boards that show up next to each other in the 3D view, you're probably not going to notice that some of the textures are repeating. So you can save yourself a little bit of space, and you don't need an enormous texture to texture a whole barrel. So if we look down here in my node editor, I've got some mapping set which I don't actually need. What these two nodes are doing is they are telling the image texture to use the UVs that I unwrapped to determine where the image is being placed on the object. Again, that does it by default, so you don't have to worry about that. I can actually just delete them, and you're not going to notice a difference in the render. The other two nodes I have here are for the displacement, so there's a little bit of a bump happening on the surface. You can see it, especially you can see it right here. If I remove that from the displacement, it renders flat. If I put that back into the displacement, you can see a little bit of texture here. And the way that I'm controlling that is I have an RGB to black and white node, which is converting it basically to a black and white image. So it's only using the grayscale to determine how much it's affecting the surface. And then I have this math node, which if I delete it, I'll re-add it so you can see how I added it. It's Shift-A, add converter math, and I'll just drop that right on top of that noodle and change it from add to multiply. And then the way that this works is it takes this black and white grayscale image and it multiplies it by whatever value you input here. So if you multiply it by 1, anything times 1 is itself, so it's full strength, what it would normally be. If I multiply it by 0.2, you're going to see the bump effect is very much diminished. You can go above 1, so if I type in 5, you get even more extreme. If you can go 50, actually, yeah, it does affect it a little bit more, but not much, and I rarely have to go above 1 or 2 at the most. So that's the barrel texture.